I was concerned about holding my students accountable for not only the flipped learning, but for their learning in general. And so here are a few of the ways that I overcame this in my flipped classroom. One of my biggest worries was that students would have access to the flipped material. You need to check with your students. Ask them if they have a computer or a tablet at home with internet access. Ask them if they have a phone they can use to access stuff online. If you have students that don't, you need to find ways that they can have access. Some suggestions might be come in before or after school and use a school computer. Use the local library's computers. Do you have a neighbor who would allow you to use their computer and internet? Check out a school computer. I was lucky enough to have an administrator who approved this. There was a lot of rules and a lot of red tape. Students and parents had to sign off on the student checking out the Chromebook. But it was worth it for my 2 students who did not have a computer at home but did have internet access. Visit grandma, use your smartphone. They all have them. Let's use it to help them learn. We have talked about this before in previous videos, but you have to teach viewing skills and note-taking skills. We often assume students come to us with the skills they need to pay attention to a video. They've been watching movies their entire lives. However, educational videos are much different than a movie they watch on the weekends. Teach them how to watch these. The same is true for note-taking. They have been in school for years. Surely someone has taught them how to take notes. Do not assume. Teach them this skill. We have already talked in length about this in the Contemplate and Anticipate video, but I feel like it's important enough to review. How will I teach my students viewing skills? I have been given the opportunity to do this 3 times. The first time was with the students I started with at the beginning of the year. I created a PowerPoint and asked the students to sit down with their parents and complete this flipped classroom lesson. This is what was included in the lesson. What a flipped classroom was, what is expected of students prior to class. It explained that deadlines were not negotiable because the student would not be able to complete the in-class learning if the out-of-class learning did not happen. It explained good note-taking skills and asked them to add a comment with any questions or concerns about a flipped classroom. I regretted not talking it through with the students, so the second opportunity I did. I had a handful of students who were added to my accelerated class a few weeks late. I sat down with them and went over the PowerPoint in detail, and then asked them to sit down with their parents and explain the flipped classroom and the expectations to them. I regretted things once again. My students were not using the videos in the best ways possible. They were not pausing to take notes, stopping and rewinding when they didn't quite understand, and they never watched them again. So the third opportunity, I did it right. I created a flipped classroom lesson, and I completed the lesson in class like I was a student. I read all the directions aloud like I would have read them in my mind if I were the student. I watched the video. During the video, I took notes on the board like I would have in my math journal, which is where we take notes in our class. I paused to finish the notes, and I stopped and backed the video up when I didn't understand something, needed to hear it again, or needed more time to take notes. After the video was over, I watched it again to make sure I didn't miss anything, and I added a few more notes. Next, I referred to the pages in the book, and I actually projected them on the board so the students could see what I was looking at. I added notes to my math journal and completed the handful of on your own problems. I then made a note about something I felt like I didn't quite understand so that I wouldn't forget to ask the class and Mrs. Moore tomorrow. I even highlighted it to be sure that I saw it during class. That was it. It worked. The students were taking better notes, asking more questions, and they came to class more prepared. I really think this is something that every teacher needs to figure out with trial and error. However, I would recommend that you be very specific. We often think that students know how to take notes and they know how to listen, when in all reality they don't. Or at least they don't with the detail and attention they would need to. Err on the side of too much detail of what is expected than on too little. And find what works for you. Next, put a plan into place to hold students accountable. What happens when they come to class without the flipped material completed? Do they sit in the back of the class and complete it before joining in? Do they feel lost while completing the in-class learning? Unfortunately, this will always be a problem with the flipped classroom. What we want to avoid is the habitually unprepared student. However, a few students a day might just be something we have to manage on a daily basis, so plan for it. I was fortunate enough to have very little problems with this as my flipped classroom students are in the accelerated program. They're usually more responsible and their parents have set high expectations for being prepared for class. With this information about my students, I chose to allow them to feel lost in class. What I found was that these students did not like to feel lost and did not like their classmates to see them come unprepared. They were embarrassed about their lack of being prepared. I have spoken to other teachers who choose to have the unprepared student sit in the back of the room and complete the flipped lessons. They try to do a fun activity during this time so the unprepared students feel like they are missing something fun instead of boring classwork. Both teachers I spoke to said that once the students realized that they would miss something fun, they rarely had students come consistently unprepared. They did mention a handful of students a couple of times a week, but very few habitually unprepared students. You will at times have a few unprepared students, so be sure you have a plan in place that works for you and for your students. However, do not lecture twice. When we use the flipped classroom method and then lecture in class, we are either wasting that class time or wasting student homework time to learn the basics. When you do both flipped lessons and lecture in class, you'll find a few things. First, students will stop completing the flipped lessons because they know that you will give them that same material in class. Second, you will have behavior problems during class lecture from students who did complete the flipped lessons because they already know this material and they're bored. Third, you will have less time to complete deep and transfer knowledge on the material since you are using homework and class time to complete the surface learning. If you're going to lecture in class, maybe a flipped classroom is not for you, and you'd be better off using a different teaching method in your class. Our class time is precious. Do not waste it doing the same thing twice. I know what you're thinking, but what if they don't understand? I have to lecture again. What I found was, first, often the students who don't understand did not complete the flipped material. Send them to complete the flipped material with their phones or a classroom computer. Have them use headphones for less disruptions. However, have an additional consequence. Lunchtime detention to complete the in-class portion worked well for me. Second, after class discussion, most students who didn't understand do, so use discourse to your advantage. Third, use classroom seating to your advantage. Place a student who often does not understand with a few who understand most of the time. They will pull this student up to their level. Also, do not place students who often do not complete their flipped classroom in the same group. The whole group may fall to their level. Place these students with their classmates who do complete the flipped lessons, and you should see improvement in the flipped lesson completion percent. Fourth, work in a small group with those students who still do not understand but did complete the flipped material. Another thing I did to hold my students accountable was to use them. Use your students. They can make videos too. It was suggested to me that when a student finds a mistake in one of my videos, I should ask them to make a video without a mistake to teach the same material. Or you could assign students to create their own flipped lessons over a specific concept. It could be something you have or haven't learned in class. If they can create a lesson to teach others, then they know the material and they understand the material much better. All right, short recap on holding students accountable. Make sure they have access to the material. Teach them video viewing and note-taking skills. Hold them accountable for flipped lessons. Do not lecture twice. And students can make flipped lessons too. As always, find what works for you and what works for your students and do it.